Hi guys, welcome to our daily encounter. In Romans chapter 11 and verse 22, we're told, "Behold then the kindness and severity of God." And in this verse is a very important principle. And that principle is that we should have a well-rounded view of God. We shouldn't just focus on a few attributes that we like about God and then throw out the others. But we should consider all of the attributes of God and all the truth about God revealed in scriptures. For instance, if a person focuses too much on the kindness of God, the temptation will be then to live a loose life, a life that basically just views God as a grandfather in the sky who never disciplines, never judges or anything like that, but you can do anything and everything pleases him. On the other side, we could focus too much on the severity of God to the point that it removes all hope of ever finding salvation, because we might think that, well, what's the point of even trying to serve him, because all he is this wrathful, judging God who's just waiting to destroy us. And therefore we can lose all hope and cease wanting to serve him. So it's always important to have a well-rounded view of God. And I don't know of a better place in scriptures to get that well-rounded view than Psalm 80, which is also in our reading today. Psalm 80 can be split up into 4 sections. The first section being verses 1 through 3, second section verses 4 through 7, the third section 8 through 13, and the fourth section verses 14 through 19. And each of these sections teaches us things about God. The first section teaches us about the leading of God in verse 1, the glory of God in verse 1, the power of God and the favor of God, or the power of God in verse 2, the favor of God in verse 3, and the salvation of God in verse 3. Section 2 teaches us about the anger of God in verse 4, the discipline of God in verses 5 through 6, and then the sorrow and the shame that comes from that in verses 5 and 6. The care of God is found in section 3 in verses 8 through 11, the deliverance of God in verse 8, the provision of God in verse 9. And then in section 4, we learn about the presence of God in verse 14, the attention of God in verse 14, the care of God in verse 14, and the strength of God in verse 17. So that's a lot of things that we learn about God and read about in connection to God in this one psalm. And so as we do our reading today, let's reflect on all these different aspects of God and these different ways that he has worked with his people and the things that we can learn from those different things. And one of the reasons why we want to do that is not just for what we stated before, but because when we have a more full view of God, even in these detailed things, we find that God is everything that we need in every situation that we have. Sometimes we need to know God as a God who leads. In certain situations when we don't know what to do. Sometimes we might need to reflect on the glory of God. When we look at the darkness of this world and we look at how difficult things in this world, to just lift our eyes up and behold the glory of God. Sometimes we need to know the power of God when we're seeking his help and desiring his aid. We need to be reminded of that. The favor of God also is important as well. When we need his favor, when we need his support, when we need him to look down upon us favorably. And then of course the salvation of God as well. When we need deliverance, when we need a way out, God is our salvation. The anger of God and the discipline of God is important for us to remember when we do sin, when we do go astray, when we do rebel against the Lord, to help us to remember that we need to turn back to the Lord, that we don't want to offend the Lord. He is glorious and he is powerful, and to have him, or to be under the anger and the discipline of God, is a very serious thing, and it will encourage us to run back to him in repentance and in love and want to restore that relationship again. The care of God is important when we need his care, when things are looking bleak, when maybe we don't know where our next meal is coming from or how we're going to pay for the next bill that comes in the mail. The care of God for us is important. The deliverance of God is important also for things we mentioned before. We can understand where the provision of God would be important, going back to the care of God that we talked about. The presence of God, knowing God's presence is with us, to walk with us. The attention of God, we have his attention, and so on and so forth. The strength of God goes back to the power of God. Anyways, you can go through the list of all these different things that we learn about God, and it has practical value. Again, because life has so many different experiences, and each experience is going to require us to pull from a different attribute of God related to that. But if we have just a short list of things that we understand about God, we're not going to have a very substantial list to pull from when we do need to lean on the Lord, and when we do need to have him show up in these different ways. So let's read Psalm 80 very carefully today as we do our reading. Go through it line by line, verse by verse, and see what we can learn about God as we go through there. Your list might be a little bit different than mine, and that's okay. As long as we're learning more about the Lord, as long as we're learning more about how he has revealed himself in his workings with his people, that's the important thing. So with that, guys, I do thank you for watching the video today. I hope you guys have a great day. Love you guys. God bless.